Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, this is Justin Brown. I'm the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. Recorded Content is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Today, I have Declan Mulkeen on the show, the CMO of Strategic ABM and the host of the Let's Talk ABM podcast. Declan and I are going to dig into the term account-based podcasting, where it fits, and if and when it makes sense. It's been a hotly debated topic in the B2B podcasting space, and I'm excited to talk about it with the CMO of an ABM agency who just so happens to run a B2B podcast himself. Enjoy the show. All right, so you and I connected because I recently posted on LinkedIn about how simply reaching out to someone in your ICP with the intent of establishing a relationship to one day sell to them is not ABM. This new term, account-based podcasting, has basically made it so that you can use your podcast as an in to try to sell to people. We can get into what ABM actually is, but before we get there, what do you think of the term account-based podcasting?
Good question, Justin, to start this off, really. Well, it's been floating around for a while now, and I think it's kind of just like ABM is, evolving into ABE, ABX, AB, account-based everything. It's natural that account-based podcasting has become a term that some people have latched onto. When we were commenting on that post of yours and we were talking about it through LinkedIn, what struck me was the kind of slightly dodgy, for want of a better word, approach of targeting people just because you want to try to win their business, and therefore you say, "Hey, would you mind coming on my podcast?" But your ulterior motive is you want to win them as a client, and I that was the premise that I felt a little bit uncomfortable with, and from my own experience of running a podcast and, inviting guests, what I'm looking for is just great guests who've got great stories to share, really. And if something comes of it, that's all great and well. But otherwise, the primary objective is really to have a very good, to have a good conversation and to share that conversation with my audience, really. So that was really what prompted me to comment on your post, really.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me is, look, I am not an ABM expert, and as a small business owner, I have for years heard the term ABM tossed around. So of course I've looked into it, and the more that I peek under the hood, I realize how complex of strategies are required to run successful ABM campaigns. And so, when I hear account-based podcasting and then it's just people reaching out, I'm like, well, that's just cold outreach. And actually, before we started this podcast, I was talking to Declan, talking to you about how I started my career as an SDR. And I'm like, well, it's not, from what I've learned at a very high level, reaching out to someone saying, do you want to come on my podcast? I don't know. For that post, I leveraged Nick Bennett, who is the head of ABM for a B2B software company, to make sure that my understanding was correct. But that was where I kind of just was a little bit confused. I'm like, well, how is this account-based anything? It's just cold outreach, right?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, if you think about the foundation of ABM or account-based marketing, it goes back about 20 years to 2003. And the Bev Burgess, who actually is the person who actually coined the term account-based marketing, even she admits today that perhaps the M for marketing isn't perhaps the best term, because it's actually a lot more organizational wide. It impacts sales, it impacts customer success, it impacts the whole organization. So if you take account-based as the root, then that's all about working out which clients, which kind of accounts do you want to have more of, and how can you find them and how can you win them? And that is primarily the premise of account-based marketing. And obviously, referring to your question around, podcasting and if, are targeting people through an account-based podcast strategy. Well, going back to what I said earlier, I think it can form part of your overarching strategy, which obviously but the key thing is you need to work out at the very beginning, what clients or what prospects, do I want to have more of? What kind of accounts are the right fit for my company that I can service, that I can delight, that I can grow, and that can be, quite importantly, profitable for me as a company? And if as part of that strategy, you create a podcast, you invite guests from those target accounts, you end up gaining, inside knowledge about those companies, which can help you as part of your strategy. That's all very well and good, but it shouldn't be the primary objective for you.
Yeah, I spent some time at an organization that was very sales based. And yeah, I would say they ran an account based selling model where, everyone in the organization was focused on very specific accounts. And it was, have you connected with them? And this was run mainly by salespeople. Like, have you connected with them on LinkedIn? Okay, we're going to this conference. Make sure you reach out to every person from target company before we go to the conference. Then when you're at the conference, you meet with them in person. We'll have, by the way, we'll have our owner of the company also, try and track them down at some point. So, when I hear account-based podcasting, and then I've seen things like that, I've talked to people like Nick, talked to people like you, I'm like, I think more goes into an account-based strategy than just that outreach. So from your perspective, what is required for a company to do ABM effectively?
Well, the first thing that we say to companies that, when we engage with them to have a conversation about whether ABM is a good fit for them is, we ask them some questions around, are they targeting mid-market to enterprise organizations? Because if you're targeting, SME, SMB, ABM is not going to be a good fit. What is the average order value of the service or the product that you sell? If it's not at least $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per annum, ABM is not going to be a good fit for you. We ask questions like, do you have enough resources internally? Do you have enough marketeers? Do you have the people who can actually help you to deliver an ABM strategy? Because ABM requires a lot of heavy lifting and it requires a lot of resources. And, you can obviously outsource some or all of those resources to an agency like ourselves, or you can decide to do it internally, of course. But those are some of the typical questions we ask. So I think the key thing is ABM is not for everyone. And it's not something that should be taken lightly, because ABM is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not like setting up a few Google PPC campaigns and you plug in a few accounts into LinkedIn and you do a nice few adverts and you start running some adverts, and hey presto, you've got a whole lot of downloads and some ebook signups or some webinar signups. That's all very, very well and good, but that is not ABM. So ABM is a much more of a holistic, account-centric approach to either winning, growing, and or retaining your most important accounts. And that's the position that we take when we talk to the market.
And that's what led to me wanting to post about this and talk to you about this is, again, as a business owner myself, I kept hearing ABM, and I sat down with ABM agency owners or people who are practitioners at ABM agencies. And very much like you're saying, I wound up it's not for me. And then when I see not everybody, but lots of folks, online or wherever saying, it was on HubSpot's, it was presented at HubSpot's inbound conference as this new approach. And it was kind of contradictory to what I've heard from people like yourself who, any good ABM practitioner, like me talking to Nick, me talking to you or others, is like, well, I'm not 100% sure if ABM is going to be a fit for you. So I have one side of it where this is this space that I play in, which is podcasting, and people saying, you need to get into account-based podcasting. And then I've got the other side, which are the actual ABM or ABX practitioners saying, well, hold on. And that's really why I wanted to peel back the onion. So where do you see the overlap in where account-based podcasting can fit in your account-based strategy?
So I think it all comes down to content, if you think about it. Ultimately, when you're engaging with an account that you're looking to win, or an account that you're looking to influence, or an account that you're looking to grow, you have to be able to put in front of that account a value proposition. You have to be able to differentiate yourself, whatever type of organization you are, whatever type of product or service that you sell. You have to be able to differentiate yourself, and you differentiate yourself particularly through a value proposition, through a messaging strategy, through a content strategy, through an account experience, which is obviously taking that account through an experience as they get to know you, as you get to know them, and as you bring them through that kind of buying cycle to whether or not they choose to buy from you, or whether they choose to abandon and choose to go with somebody else. So account-based podcasting, to use the term, forms part of that kind of content strategy. So we find, with clients that they've got a podcast already, or we find that they've got some great thought leaders in the business and their voice is not being heard. So if that's the case, and if we take the first example, and they've got an account, they've got a podcast already, it may well be that they haven't got enough reach. It may well be that the subjects that they're talking about aren't the right subjects, linking back to the value proposition, aren't the right subjects to engage with the audience that they're trying to engage with. Because very often, if you're choosing the subjects yourself, you're choosing the guests yourself, you're not necessarily thinking about the end result in terms of, will this podcast, will this content, will this guest resonate with the audience that I'm looking to target. So I think if you ask yourself those questions at the beginning, those would be questions that would be an account-based strategy type questions. Will this person be relevant for my audience? Will the content that I'm talking about be relevant for my audience? Will they find this of interest? Will it help them to learn more about the subject? And will it want them to learn more about me? So I think that kind of answers the question there.
It does, to an extent. I guess where I'm confused, or kind of tongue-in-cheek confused, is that you are referring consistently to the audience and not to the guest. And I think that is the flip of a switch that I had, which I was very focused on the guests, right? Who can I bring on to establish relationships with, so that maybe one day they'll buy from me. And I think the switch for me got flipped when I realized that the broader reach, the way that I can get in front of more people and have more people care about what I'm doing, is to care much more about the audience. And I think that is the main thing about account-based podcasting I don't even like really using the term because I feel like it's misleading. But account-based podcasting being a way to network with someone in your space, the switch got flipped when I realized the impact should be the audience. So why do you keep referring to the audience and not to the guest?
Well, here's the thing. If you think about, content marketing, which obviously has been around in different guises for many years, starting off as, simple blogging through to SEO, and now through to what many people refer to as content marketing. The first rule of content marketing is create great content. If you create great content, the audience will naturally navigate to that great content and will want to read it. The upside comes with the SEO, the upside comes with the engagement that comes downstream, the upside comes with potential contact form fills, downloads, whatever kind of metric you have in place to measure the impact of your content strategy. When you think about podcasting, you've got two parts, as you just quite rightly said, Justin. You've got obviously the guests that you interview and that you choose to interview. You've got the subject matter that you choose to interview them about, and you've got the audience that you want to consume that content. So I think you've got to answer both parts of that dilemma. You've got to want to find people that you believe are of interest to you, because obviously ultimately it's your show, it's your podcast, it's your reputation that you have. You're building your personal brand, and your podcasting is a great way to do that. And then separately, you're looking to put that podcast out to an audience. And obviously, once you start building up a number of followers, then the natural connection will be, well, hey, I love that guest that he had on, or actually I didn't quite like that guest, or do you know what, I've listened to 3 guests in a row and I wasn't very happy, so do you know what, I'm going to jump ship and I'm going to listen to Sangram's podcast instead. So you've got to be a bit careful, right? Because otherwise, if you're solely thinking about the guests and you're not thinking about the audience, you might end up committing the kind of cardinal sin of actually eating your own baby, so to speak. So you actually don't end up delivering what you need to deliver, which is basically an engaged audience. So I think you've got to look at both sides: the guest, well, actually three parts rather: the guest, the subject matter that you're going to talk about, and obviously the audience that is going to look to consume that content.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm not here to say that people shouldn't try to have a podcast that one day hopefully leads to people buying from them in a B2B setting. But where my mindset changed was that I'm not trying to sell to Declan. I'm trying to sell to the people who are listening to this show. And if Declan happens to be someone in my ICP, there's nothing wrong with that. And if one day you want to leverage my services, that's great. But the people who I focus on is how can my episodes be of value to a wider, broader audience, because I don't have that one-to-one ABM strategy going on in my business, because I don't sell to enterprise accounts. It's not one small piece of a much larger puzzle. And when that changed for me, I was more proud of my show. I felt like it was more relevant. More people would care about it. I can go on for days, but what I want to do now actually is pivot this episode to some real world examples using your show. Okay. So, you mentioned that, you run the Let's Talk ABM podcast. And something that you had also said in that LinkedIn post was, we all listen to podcasts more and more. We're looking to learn, discover, validate, gain insight, and that should be the focus. So how do you make sure to do that in your show?
Well, it goes back to choosing the right guests, right? It comes back to look at, obviously the podcast Let's Talk ABM is focused around talking to account-based marketing leaders. What I like to call people who've got dirt under their nails. And by that, I mean people who've got the experience, that have got the t-shirt, that have got the battle scars. They've been doing account-based marketing for a number of years. They've failed, and then they've succeeded. It's because I think the audience that I have is looking to hear not just the success stories, but also some of where people have gone wrong and how they've corrected and what they've learned. We all love a hero who's gone through a journey of discovery and come out winning in the end, right? So I think a lot of the people that I look to talk to are companies that are quite, they're honest about what's happened. They're honest about, some of the guests I've had have explained that perhaps the first year of their ABM strategy was a complete disaster. And then they talk through why. One very famous guest I had on, Andrea Clatworthy, who heads up ABM at Fujitsu. She talked about the first year she made a huge mistake, which was basically trying to target too many accounts in the first year. So those kind of stories are ones that resonate really well with people, because then that says, right, okay, tick. So when I start an ABM program, I've got to start small. So I think that's when I'm looking for guests, I'm always looking for people who've got those kind of war stories that they can share. Because ultimately, if you think about a lot of kind of B2B podcasting, we're looking, as I said in that post, we're looking for those stories. We're looking for those kind of anecdotes. We're looking for those kind of learnings that people are able to share because they've gone before us. They have taken the step, or they have gone on that journey before us. So in a funny kind of way, they are shining a light. They are giving us that roadmap of the steps that we should take, and making sure that we don't go off piste and we don't take the wrong road. So I think those are the kind of people I look for.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It was something that I wanted to ask you about. Is you play in what is now becoming a bit of a crowded space, the ABM podcast space for B2B marketers, which is crazy that, if you said to someone 2 years ago that, there's going to be it's going to get pretty competitive in the ABM for B2B marketer in technology space. People will be like, in podcasts, people are going to be like, are you serious? Because, at that time, if you had a marketing podcast, it was like, oh, wow, like you're doing something in marketing on podcasting, and now the world is getting more and more niche to be able to provide value to very specific audiences. You already mentioned Sangram's podcast. So what are you doing to continue to stand out with your podcast in what's becoming a bit of a saturated space?
Well, it's like I mean, you said the word, niche or niche, as we like to say in British English, and it's all about that. I think actually, it's about finding your area, finding your expertise. I remember I interviewed, Nick Bennett, a long time ago now, actually, and I talked to him about his LinkedIn strategy, and he said, "Look, I try to talk about three things, which is, field marketing. I think he said field marketing, baseball, and personal branding, which is an interesting mix, right?" And Nick's
Nick.
Gone up, yeah, and he's a semi-pro baseball player, right? And he's such a lovely guy as well. And he's gone on to create a great following, on LinkedIn in particular. And I think it comes back to that really is being true to your core. And in my case, it's just focusing solely and exclusively on ABM. I don't go to the left. I don't go to the right. I just, there are other podcasts which are around the ABM space, which do talk about other things such as demand gen, such as personal branding, such as corporate branding, etc. But what I like to say, just going back to my previous answer, is just to focus on those kind of war stories. What have people done and what did they find? And that's what people, because the thing about ABM is that it has, it is becoming a bit of a crowded space in many ways. And obviously a lot of the technology brands are spending a lot of money, a lot of marketing dollars promoting their technology platforms, etc. But when we talk to, prospective clients around ABM, they more or less fall into three categories. There is, 1/3 have, are more than 12 months into their ABM journey. 1/3 have just started. And 1/3 have either not started or are thinking about starting. So although it does feel like a crowded space and that ABM has been around forever, I'd say the last 2, 3, 4 years has probably been, a huge leap in ABM. And I think going back to your original question, all I try to do is be true to the subject that I'm trying to talk about and to find the best guests I can that can talk about it.
Yeah, and I did an interview with Chris Lockhead, who is kind of the founder of Category Creation, and he loves to talk about how saturation is kind of a joke to talk about. He says, there'll always be great fiction writers, there'll always be great artists, but it's, about trying to create something great. And then he's also a big proponent of, niching or niching, niching down and finding your lane, finding what people will care about that you do, and creating something great. And there's never too many people in the space as long as you care about what you're doing. Yeah. One of the things that I, is very cool about this conversation is that we get to talk about, a specific topic in podcasting, this account-based podcasting topic, but also that you yourself are a B2B podcaster. So I assume that in one way or another, your podcast is more than just you wanted to have a podcast, but that it lends to some form of content marketing for, your agency that you're a CMO of. So how are you using your podcast as content marketing for your business?
Well, I mean, it's funny you asked that actually, because the whole podcast, it came about with the beginning of the pandemic last in March 2020, when I just said, look, I need to start having some conversations. And so it was that was the kind of the impetus and the kind of the genesis starting was, let's have some conversations. And I started talking to, various partners that we worked with at the agency, various technology partners. And then from there, it branched out to talking to lots of, ABM thought leaders. But in terms of, so originally I had created it as a webinar series, or kind of a live kind of like, a video series. And then I, conversely, which is interesting perhaps for some of your viewers and some of your listeners, I then converted it into a podcast thereafter. So it didn't start straight away as a podcast. It started as a webinar series. But what we do at the agency is obviously we do just like this today, Justin. We create a recording. We create a transcript, we create a podcast, we publish a web page with the video, we publish a web page with the podcast, we create a synopsis of the interview, and we cut up the interview into bite-sized chunks of 45 seconds, 60 seconds, a lot more kind of consumable content. We create, Instagram tiles, we create GIFs. I mean, we literally go to town creating a whole bunch of, repurposed content, little tiles with testimonials, little tiles with quotations. So I think that the secret to the success of this type of content from a B2B point of view is there are so many gems. There are so many, golden nuggets that come out of these interviews. And sometimes they're lost within that 30 minutes, right? Or at least they're buried within, like a good nugget, they're buried in that 30 minutes. So the key thing for the audience that you're looking to reach through this kind of account-based strategy is how can you pull out those nuggets and make them available in a fashion and in a mode that they want to consume. Because not everyone wants to sign up to a podcast. Not everyone wants to listen to it or watch a webinar. People might want to consume a quick blog article, or they want to see a nice tile. So that's our advice really to anyone, is just think about how can you, spend, it's that golden adage, most people spend 80% of their time producing content and 20% of their time promoting it, right? And my advice to everyone is to flip that and to spend 80% of your time promoting that content. And then, probably do less content, but do it better.
All right, clip that. We're done. I think I've got the piece that I'm going to be promoting after this. That was fantastic. Yeah, our entire agency is built on the idea that people consume podcasts or content in general in a variety of ways, being written, visual, and audio format, and visual being, you create cards and or you create video content. People consume content differently. I like to use the example of if I'm watching a show with my fiance on the couch, I can't put in earbuds and listen to your podcast episode, but if I have a transcript or show notes about the episode, I can sit there on my phone and thumb through and maybe read a little bit about what the episode is about. Maybe I'll queue it up for later. Maybe I won't. Some people just don't like listening to podcasts, but doesn't mean that they don't like surfing their LinkedIn and seeing a video clip from it that they're going to engage with. And if you take that clip, like the one that I'm going to make literally out of this from what you just said, someone can learn something in that 2 minutes that they don't need to listen to the whole 30 minutes. Yeah. So I love that answer, and I could not agree more.
But I think the key thing, Justin, is to make sure that your fiance doesn't mind that you're busy on your iPhone while you're watching the show together. That's the key thing.
Well, yeah, and it's more like if we're watching, kind of mind-numbing TV, right? If we're watching like one of our shows, I'm not going to be on my phone. But if I'm watching mind-numbing TV and we're kind of watching it together, it's just time that we're spending together. All of a sudden, we're not spending it together if I put in headphones. And I'm totally serious about that. But at the same time, she doesn't care, she doesn't care if I'm on my phone and I'm thumbing through. It's very interesting how the consumption of content can be viewed so differently, even though you're basically doing the same thing, but it's rude to put in headphones in that situation. Now, conversely, there's great situations where if I'm walking my dogs, I need to pay attention to what my dogs are doing. This morning, Declan, I'm listening to your show to prepare for the interview today, and I've got my, I've got my earbuds in. and I'm walking the dogs and I'm able to keep, stay alert and watch what I'm doing, and I'm listening to the show. So depending on your situation, you're going to consume content differently. If I'm on LinkedIn in the morning and I just put out my post, which I try to do, every morning before 9 a.m., I'm reading and looking on LinkedIn. So if I see your video, I don't really feel like listening to a podcast at that time. I may not feel like reading your webpage at that time. But if your video pops up, it's 2 minutes long, it's got subtitles, maybe I watch it, maybe I, unclick so that the sound comes out and I'm sitting here drinking my coffee. So I think that it's so important for each situation to have content available for people to consume these 20, 30, 40-minute pieces of pillar content that can be turned into so many different things.
No, we're definitely seeing the same thing as you, Justin. We're definitely seeing that the consumption of the long form videos is a lot lower than the consumption of the short form. And equally, you know yourself that content that you publish through, platforms such as LinkedIn, even, LinkedIn doesn't want you to leave their platform, right? So they are obviously giving priority to content that keeps you staying in channel. So, publishing a little snippet, publishing a short 60-second video, you're going to get a lot more reaction there than people coming to your website. So it's the key thing is just to mix it up and just get a little bit, creative with your content.
And I'm curious, because we talked about it earlier, are you, you're in an interesting situation, you're an ABM company, or agency, if you will. And I'm curious if your podcast first off, if you have any sort of ABM strategy internally, and if you do, is your podcast part of any sort of internal account-based marketing strategy?
Yeah, so as the CMO of an ABM agency, naturally my job is to do account-based marketing in order to help the agency grow. So I deploy exactly the same tactics, the same strategies, the same techniques that we would run for our clients, exactly the same in order for the agency to acquire new clients. So on that side of the question, that's how I do things. In terms of the podcast, I think the podcast goes a bit further and deeper. I mean, I'll give you just an anecdote. So we run something called ABM Lunch and Learn in the agency, and that is basically a workshop that we run free of charge that any B2B technology company can sign up to and join, via a Zoom link. And we then listen to them. They tell us what their strategy is. They tell us what they're doing. They tell us how things are going. They share their successes. We then kind of do a bit of a diagnostic. We talk through some solutions, and then we give them kind of like a roadmap to help them. And it's all done free of charge. Invariably, and there's multiple marketers and salespeople on the call, and invariably what they say is, yeah, I've listened to a few of your podcasts. So in a funny kind of way, the podcast that I do for the agency, it cuts across everything that we do. So it's a branding exercise. It's a corporate branding exercise. It's a personal branding exercise. It's a thought leadership exercise. It's an authority exercise. It's there was an old, no one ever walks into a bar, and forgive me for saying this, but nobody ever walks into a bar or into a restaurant and says, give me a Dr. Pepper. They always say, give me a Coke, right? And that's because of the advertising. And that's because of the brand. That's because of the fact that you won't make a mistake by ordering a Coke. And it's the same thing with B2B, is people are looking to not make mistakes. They're looking to make sure that the vendor that they choose is a trusted vendor by the market, and is a vendor that actually understands their domain. And I think the podcast that we do, and indeed other companies, and what you do as well, Justin, that's what we're trying to do, is to show through our podcasts and then the content that we produce thereafter, to show our expertise. And I think that's the feedback that I get from people who, when I join these ABM Lunch and Learns, the feedback I get is, yeah, I love that episode, or I really loved when you talk to Hitachi, or when you talk to Fujitsu, or when you talk to Degreed or Bazaar Voice, or when you talk to Nick Bennett. That's when I hear those anecdotes on these calls, that's when I realize that what we're doing is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how many different ways I hear people use their podcasts. I'm constantly like a great example that I heard recently was someone said that they use their podcast as a way to onboard new sales reps.
Mm.
Hey, what's a better way for you to get up to speed on our space than hearing two people who are experts in our space talk about it for 40 to 45 minutes? Go listen to the last 10 episodes of our show, and you're going to have at least a decent understanding of what it is we do and how we help people. I had no idea that somebody was using their podcast as onboarding for new sales reps, and I thought that was fascinating, frankly.
No, we do something. We do something very similar, very similar with our new recruits and our new employees. We get them to listen to, or we ask them to listen to some examples of our podcast, just to get a flavor for what the clients are saying, really. Because ultimately, voice of the customer is so important, and not hearing what we say or what our CEO says or what I say as a CMO or what our branding says. That's all very good, but it's actually hearing what the customer says. That's much more important.
And I have a question for you here. This is something that I get asked about a lot when it comes to finding people to come on the show. How do you go about sourcing guests for the show?
Well, at the beginning, as I said, we started, and I think this would be my advice to anybody, start close to home. So start with your customers, start with your partners, you start with the people, that network of individuals and companies that you have that are very close to your company. That would be my advice to get you kind of up and running, because there's many parts to a podcast. And as you know yourself, there's the technology, there's the logistics, there's the preparation, there's the editing, there's all those pieces that we know, there's so many hours going to each episode, right? And then thereafter, I would, draw up a list of people that you respect in your space, people that you believe have got something which is worth sharing. And, we talked about Nick a couple of times, but, Nick has launched a podcast not too long ago, and, he's chosen 4 or 5 or 6 guests, and each one has been like, a home run, so to speak. He's chosen some fantastic guests that have really helped him to elevate his podcast. So I think I would start if if you're in a fortunate position where you can call on people that have got that kind of level of expertise and reach, that's brilliant. If not, start with your customers, start with people who are close to you, and then you can start building out. Because ultimately, I think podcasting it has a domino effect, right? So once you start knocking down the dominoes, and it gets easier and easier and easier. And that's, when I approach people now, I send them a link to my podcast, and, it's incredibly rare for anybody to turn down appearing on the Let's Talk ABM series.
So 2 things. One is a question, and then the other is just a quick anecdote. I'll start with the anecdote. So Nick's show is one of Motion, so my company's network of B2B shows, right? So we try to launch these shows for people like Nick who have a big voice, what have you. So I've watched all of these guests that you're talking about, these big name guests. I've watched them all get booked by Nick. And it is so funny, exactly what you said. If I, peel back the curtain a little bit here, is exactly how it's gone. When it first started, and Nick's first big guest was Chris Walker, and he reached out to Chris, and that was after he had recorded with Andreas from Shield, who's the CEO of Shield, and Chris very quickly was like, yeah, let's do it. Awesome. And so that was like the first big surprise. Like, whoa, we got Chris Walker on the show. Awesome. Now, and I'm going to go down another pathway, but just the power of podcasting. Nick Bennett and Chris Walker are like good friends now, which is awesome. Nick's able to network with people in the space, so on and so forth, establish good relationships. But coming back to the story, and that domino effect that you talked about, then it was, all right, we've had Chris Walker on, we've had Andreas on, we've had some really good guests. I know the show's like still relatively new, but like, what if we go for Dave Gerhardt? Who's one of the biggest voices in B2B marketing. And, what did I tell Nick? I said, just ask him. Just ask him. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? He's going to say no. And so Nick asked Dave. Boom. Then he's got Dave. Then he's got Justin Welch, who's another one of the biggest names, biggest, personalities in B2B, period. I mean, Justin teeters on B2B, personal brand, sales. He's kind of a jack of all trades kind of guy, but a big proponent of personal branding, which is Nick's show. And it's just crazy, the power of the podcast, the domino effect, like you said, and just asking people and how many people are going to be willing to say yes. Now, leading into my question, do you book your own guests? How does your booking work?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I do it all myself because I think it's more authentic. I think the fact that I'm approaching as a CMO, I'm approaching people who are other, CMOs or senior marketers or vice presidents of sales or CEOs. I think it's a lot more authentic. I wouldn't feel as comfortable if I delegated the task to somebody else. So I think authenticity is a key thing with this online branding that we're talking a lot about at the moment. And so, yeah, I do a lot of the legwork myself.
Yeah, and the reason I ask, I mean, it's a little bit of a selfish question, and it's because I get asked as the owner of a podcast agency, I get asked by people and they say, do you do the booking for us? And we did. When we first started, we had an entire plan that was rolled out around booking for you. And I just don't believe in it. And I had to shut it down because I feel like it is the entry point to the experience of running a podcast, is having the host or someone who's like the producer of the show, who likely is going to be someone who is for you're the CMO, maybe that's your senior marketing manager or something along those lines, who's like, hey, I'm the host of the show, but it's your baby. We need to make sure this thing works. I'm always going to be there to record. I'm the talent, if you will, but it's your thing, which I run into a lot with my clients, is that the host isn't always the person who owns the podcast. But at the same time, it should be one of those folks who are reaching out. Shouldn't have Justin, the agency owner, at a different company doing outreach. I had a company that did outreach for me. I then did outreach for myself on kind of an automated approach. This one where, Declan, you responded to me on LinkedIn. We bonded over a topic. I then said, hey, why don't you come on the show? And then after this, you and I are going to have this relationship where we spent time together. We talked with each other online. It just is irreplaceable. And I think it all starts from that first outreach. And it's not like a cold outreach for a demo where you need to do 1,000 of them to hope to get a few yeses. Most people are going to say, yes, you don't need to spin your wheels. I mean, I could go and book 6-10 podcasts in a couple of hours if I wanted. I actually, right now, Tristan, my business partner, is like, Justin, you got to hold off. Like, you keep recording. we're only release one episode a week, which I think is great. So I think just the reason that I wanted to hear that from you and to the audience, I didn't know the answer that he would have. I didn't know that you booked your own guests, but I had an inkling that if you really have a love for this mode of creating content, that the vast majority of people like to do their own outreach.
Yep. Well, a couple of points there just to add. First of all, I hope that my episode comes out in 2021. If you've got such a long list of recordings already done, I hope that I come out this year. That's number one.
It'll be like within the next 3 to 6 weeks. So yeah, We actually ran into it. Was interesting that you bring that up. We ran into that when we were doing more of that account-based podcasting approach. We were reaching out to tons of people, and what we found was all these people kept saying yes. Then we recorded a ton of episodes, had this huge backlog that we had to work through, and it ended up becoming, a negative piece of our brand than a positive one. So now we try to keep it within 3 to 6 weeks lead time. Lead time is good. Too much lead time is bad.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Justin, because the lead times are very, very similar. But what I was going to mention, just when you were talking, then it made me think about something about relationships. And what I've found, because I contact the people, we have a conversation either via email or via LinkedIn. I then do a get to know you meeting first. which can be anywhere between 20 minutes, and with some people it can be even an hour, that they give me of their time to get to know them. And so I ask them some questions, I get to know them, I know a bit about themselves, their family, their job, etc., etc. And then a week later or 2 weeks later, we do the recording. So what tends to happen is when you listen to the recordings and the podcasts that I do, hopefully it comes across the fact that we've actually got to know each other a bit more. And I think that's one of the key things, or one of the things that I would say to people, one of the key learnings is to go that extra mile and to take time to actually don't turn it into some kind of automated activity. Tuesday at 4:00, I'm doing a recording. No, you need to think, I'm going to be talking to this person who's fascinating to talk to, and I'm going to spend some time learning about them, and then I'll record with them a week later or 2 weeks later. But what I found, and this is a general subject around social, is often you don't sell to people, you sell through people. Right? And so because I go to this extra length and everything, I always say to the guests, hey, would you mind? I always like you to promote the podcast first, and then I'll promote afterwards. And of the 25 podcasts we've published to date in the last 12 months, every single guest has published and promoted the podcast first. And the results have been, outstanding, even for their own personal brand. They've been outstanding, and the feedback, and they've all come back to me and all said, look, that was amazing, and I've had such great feedback from me sharing my expertise, so thanks for that opportunity. So I think, and it goes back to your point then, Justin, that then after, I've got a great relationship with all these people, and if I have a question, I can ask them. If I've got a doubt about something, I can just drop them a line on LinkedIn and they'll respond. You end up building this fantastic network of people that become your friends, as you said. So I think that's one of the things that one of the greatest things I've learned from doing a podcast is the amount of people that I've built some really great relationships with.
Couldn't agree more. And I think with that, that'll probably be a good place to end here today. I couldn't agree more on that front. I mean, you look at the guy we've been talking about a lot on today, Nick, has become a great friend of mine. It all stemmed from him wanting, us being in a Slack community together. And he said, let's do a podcast. And I said, I run a podcast agency, so tell me more about wanting to start a podcast. And, he and I are good friends, and I've become friends with, countless other folks who I've had on as guests. I've appeared on their shows. I just interviewed Jesus McDonald, who I've been on his show. He's been on my show. You and I talk online, and then these conversations continue. And I apologize to the audience about the fire trucks going by. But anyway, I think this is a good spot to end. So Declan, where do people go to learn more about you, about Strategic ABM, about your podcast? Where can people go to find you?
Well, probably the easiest way, if you are looking for a podcast, the podcast is called Let's Talk ABM. Alternatively, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm publishing, like yourself, Justin, most days, and talking about ABM and talking about various aspects of helping companies to grow. So you can find me, Declan Mulkeen, on LinkedIn. And obviously, you can find the link to our agency, which is strategicabm.com. So any questions, send me a message on LinkedIn or however you'd like to reach out, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions. So Justin, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Absolutely. Thanks again. I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and it was great having you on Recorded Content.
Thanks, Justin.